Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Over the past year, AI has moved very fast. We have gone from co-pilots and assistants to autonomous agents. These agents can make decisions, they can interact with systems, and they can access sensitive enterprise data with very little human input. For many organizations, this is, of course, exciting, but it also raises an important question. How do we actually secure systems that can think, act, access data, and move that data across our environment on their own? And this is exactly what we will discuss today. So we will look at how agentic AI is changing security, where organizations may be underestimating risk, and what best practices are emerging for governance and data protection. We will also look at why data-centric security is becoming so important for AI adoption, especially when organizations need to protect data consistently across those autonomous workflows and interactions. So my name is Mirza Sarhigic, and I'm a head of product marketing at Comforte, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. So I'm very glad to welcome Enza Iannopollo. Enza is a vice president and principal analyst at Forrester with more than 10 years of experience in technology research and advisory. Her work focuses on AI, data privacy, and AI governance, and she has helped shape and launch Forrester's research in various areas such as responsible AI, for example. Today, she will be sharing some key insights from her latest research. I'm also pleased to welcome Miguel Faria. For more than 20 years, Miguel has helped organizations turn technology into a business advantage. And as a head of solution architects at Comforte, he brings extensive hands-on experience helping customers solve complex data security challenges. So Enza, Miguel, and I are very excited to have you, so many of you with us today, and we hope you will leave with practical insights you can apply right away in your organization. So before we get started, I'd also like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the session using the chat, and we will address as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end of the discussion. So let's dive in, and Enza, over to you.
Thank you, Mirza, and thank you to all of you on the line for being here following this presentation. So, as you heard, I'm gonna talk especially around the topic of AI security, agentic security. We'll talk a little bit about sovereignty as well, as that is definitely one of the risks that many companies are also assessing and mitigating when it comes to AI agents. But before I go there, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of where we are with the adoption of AI, with the adoption of agents, because these are very, very frequent questions we receive from organizations. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to just give you a little bit of an overview of the AI adoption and what companies are doing. And I have, of course, some data points to share. Our data suggests that 78% of AI decision makers report having already in their organization as generative or a predictive AI system in production. So this is not pilots anymore. This is AI and generative AI or predictive, as the slide says, really into production at scale in these organizations. Another typical question we receive is around who is leading these type of projects. And you can see from these slides, again, global data in a lot of the cases is that technology organizations really leading these AI efforts. So CIOs, head of IT, CTOs also very much leading these projects. Data analytics organizations, 14%, and then CEOs being involved. We see that definitely growing in terms of the involvement in the leadership role of the CEOs. And also we have some recent research that actually suggests that the involvement of CEOs in the AI projects of the organizations tend to be correlated to a higher level of success of these initiatives overall. So if you don't have your CEO on board, you might want to consider also inviting them to the leadership role or the leadership team for AI adoption implementation. The fact that we see a lot of the IT organizations really in charge of AI initiatives for their organizations also reflects on the type of use cases their organizations are implementing today. You can see IT operations being the key use case, both for generative AI and predictive AI across global companies, but also data management and engineering. And then to follow the other type of use cases we see AI being used for. What are agents? For some organizations, AI agents seem to be a kind of distant future, but actually the data suggests that agents are already here, and many of them, you can see again from these slides, again global data, it shows that as many as 74% of global organizations today have either AI agent in implementation phase. Some of them are implementing and expanding the use of AI agents, as some organizations are simply implementing them. So 74% is a pretty big number if you think about the way organizations are today working with agents. And I like to make this point because, as I said, many organizations still believe that this is just futuristic, distant future happening, but in reality, agents are here already, and they are in many organizations. We start to see that not just because of the numbers, but also for some of the elements and the sorts of risk that agents are bringing to organizations. And I'm going to show you some examples in a second. Before I go there, I also wanted to cover the topic of ROI. And this is definitely one, again, very common questions from our clients that are really keen on measuring the return on investment for their AI initiatives. What we are measuring compared to the previous years that we have collected data, you can see 2024, 2025, there is a little bit less confidence in what organizations are measuring and what they see in terms of these return on investments. You can see top line benefits declining from a 31% to a 25% in 2025, and similar trends for the other two items that we are measuring here. We will soon have data for 2026 so that we can continue the trending and see how organizations are feeling when it comes to the specific ROI and really measuring the impact of AI in their organizations in terms of value. But it's interesting to see that between 2024 and 2025 already there was a sort of a decline really in confidence that AI is delivering on the value, or in other words, that actually organizations are measuring this value in a way that really reflects that consistently and accurately. And I say that because part of the consideration when it comes to ROI also has to do with the way companies are thinking about it. You can see there that 47% of tech leaders would consider an AI initiative successful if it has a positive ROI within a year. Now, this is a very, very short-sighted expectation, short-sighted view. We know, especially of organizations that have tried to move from pilots to production to have those AI use cases at scale, that you need governance to be there, you need security to be taken care of, and you really need a robust risk management approach to it. And typically, to set up this risk management approach would take time. It's not something that can happen overnight. And so that 12 months time frame really squeezes the time that organizations have to develop the right steps, the right kind of building blocks they need for AI to deliver value. And so a little bit of the issue is there really squeezing the time frame to 12 months for projects that would naturally need a little bit more of time. And the fact that they are not allocating the time that is needed for security, for governance, means also that when you try then to scale these projects, you are going to encounter a lot of challenges and the value cannot be achieved. So here is really a close link between the way we think about ROI, the way we approach the AI initiatives, and the necessary time that you need also to make sure that the governance and the security is in place. So a little bit of the ROI, the fact that the companies are losing a little bit of confidence around it, probably has to do with the setup of the expectations in the very first place. 12 months is a very short time. And the other elements that we are seeing is that despite the ambition to have so many more, you can see on the slide, 46 non-technical employees need to use generative AI. Many organizations are setting up that sorts of threshold. They are saying almost half of our employees need to use generative AI in their everyday work. At the same time, when it comes to looking at the support that these employees are being given in terms of the policy, in terms of the training and the other elements that can support the adoption of AI, we see that being not there necessarily and not in the measure that is needed to these employees, to this team, to really then use AI in a way that is really making sense for them. So again, not considering some of those steps when it comes to the governance, to the policy, to the training, of course, will have an impact on what employees are doing with AI, how many of them are using AI, and if really organizations are closing the trust gap that still they are experiencing from their employees' perspective. And then more data there on the lack of governance. So the idea that the value that AI is giving today, is producing today for organization, has to be necessarily supported by the right governance and security and risk management measure is a fundamental part of the story that we are not just saying today, but the realization that many companies are coming to. Which this is now looking especially in that sort of risk element, especially on the security side. We ask security leaders globally to tell us what are some of the concerns that they have with emerging tech. You can see at the very top there, generative AI, AI agents. These are definitely concerning technology leaders, security leaders in particular today in many organizations globally. And when it comes to the adoption of AI specifically, then we have asked these leaders, so security and risk leaders, to tell us what are their concerns when it comes to the adoption. So what is the barrier to the adoption of AI in their global organizations? And you can see here this slide, data privacy and security is the number one concern when is the barrier to the adoption of AI. We then asked, what happened after you have adopted AI? So now AI is in the organization. What is the concern there? What is the really worry when now your employees are using AI? And you can see the data is very clear there. Leaks and data privacy concerns not to be able to meet compliance requirements, especially with privacy regulations such as the GDPR, are the number two concerns that organizations have once they are using AI. And then you can see there across the different options on these slides, there are also a number of other concerns related to the misuse of AI outputs, the inaccuracies, hallucinations, and so forth. I mentioned earlier that, of course, we have data suggesting that AI agents have made their way into global organizations. We have seen many organizations, again, expanding implementation of agents. And the other thing that tell us that this is happening, of course, is the number of incidents that we start to map in the marketplace. And here I have just a few of them. Just to really explain how the security impacts of agents is something an organization must necessarily consider if they really want to have these AI agents working in their organizations and working in the right way. So the first example there is Verso, that you may have seen these on the news. One of their employees connected an AI tool to their own kind of internal employee workplace. And that was a free version of that AI tool that these employees connected through their corporate workplace. Probably that connection that integration wasn't audited, wasn't noticed. Probably the employee themselves maybe forgot that they have created that integration in the very first place. But then through that integration, an attacker went through, of course, the AI app first, and then was able to get the credentials of these employees who has created a connection between the AI app and versus internal systems. And that resulted in, of course, a security incident with the exploitation of those credentials and the access to a lot of sensitive data that related to Vercel's business and customers. So that was a high-level sorts of incidents due to the fact that that specific AI app was now connected to the Vercel's internal system. But this is a call to say that AI tools are everywhere. Employees use these tools. Sometimes it's a free version of the tools, and they are connected into our corporate environments. And so if there isn't the right management from a security perspective, these then become the point of entry for attackers, for a number of other type of security incidents. And so very important to be sure to have the right boundaries when these integrations happen. Sears, this is a physical retailer, right? They have a number of different shops across the world, and also they have, of course, an online presence. They are using AI chatbots to serve their customers, but through these AI chatbots, in the last few months, they've experienced a huge amount of data being exposed online. We are talking about 3.7 million of logs of customers' conversations, including audio files between these customers and those AI chatbots. One would wonder why this data was kept in the clear and how through the AI chatbots, all this data was exposed. Again, there was a lot of sensitive personal data of customers in these conversations. The other here incident is Meta. One of their engineers needed help, and so posted through an internal form a question looking for help. The AI agent answered the call for help and provided a sort of guidelines on what to do to solve the specific problem the engineer was having. The engineer implemented the guidance from the AI agents, but that ended up into exposing a significant amount of employees' data to that internal form. So interesting how sometimes following the guidance from the agent resulting in this form of accident is interesting because, of course, we are going to talk about the specific element of intent, securing intent of the agent, the fact that AI agents don't necessarily understand the context within which the employees operate, don't understand the boundaries within which the employee operates, and that, of course, can create a lot of issues like in this case. And then finally, another case of an AI chat that, again, exposed data, 300 million messages there exposed to the internet through that AI chat and the chatbots that many companies are using today. So a lot to think about in terms of the real life sorts of incidents that we see with AI agents. But there are a couple more of instances that we modeled out, some of the use cases we also hear in our research interviews. And this is part of our research, and this specific this specific example that we have are really to do with the potential for significant financial impact that security incidents through an AI agent or a chain of agents can actually have for organizations. Remember, agents are going to operate in your systems, in your environments. They can make decisions. They can change third-party systems depending on the permission they have, depending on the specific agency and autonomy you decide to give these agents to operate in real time in your runtime environments in your organizations. So in this case is the simple scenario of an agent that sole job is to make sure that thresholds of inventory remain constant. Imagine that you run again, supermarket chain, and you need to make sure that your level of a certain good are always there in your inventory. Misconfiguration on application, the agent misreading data, the agent hallucinating on the level of data, of the type of data the agent is reading, might turn out to be a misinterpretation of those threshold that the agent is there to monitor. And if the agent now sees that the thresholds are not where they should be, might just decide to kick off a workflow where it's going to order more of that specific good that maybe you don't have enough, according to the agent. And that might kick off a series of action, including, maybe a urgent delivery of that good to make sure that you are restoring the inventory level. And then this good these goods make your way to your organization, to your warehouses, but you don't know where to store them because actually the inventory is right. The inventory was exactly what it needed to be. And what happens if that particular good is not something that is going to last for a long time? What is something that would spoil or would go wasted quickly in time? So again, examples of how very quickly things can have a significant financial impact out of a agents misreading data from a misconfiguration or hallucinating. Very, very significant consequences from a financial perspective. This other case has to do instead with this idea that, of course, you may have different agents working on top of each other context, meaning an agent reads context in a certain ways, produce metadata that now another agent is going to use to make another decision or to create context for another agent to act. And I like this example because by the time the human is in the loop, the series of decisions that different agents have made, it's as such that it's very difficult for the human to figure out exactly where the mistake happened and how to reverse. This specific case has to do with an agent that is there to check that regulatory updates are integrated, maybe in some contracts clauses or maybe in some contractual language. Again, if there is a hallucination from one of the agents, that is going to kick off a series of decisions that are going to have, again, significant consequences. We are talking about, in this case, contractual requirements, regulatory requirements, and by the time the human is in the loop, it's very difficult to figure out where exactly that hallucination happened in the very first place. So because organizations are quickly developing and implementing these agents, and because from a security perspective, there is a lot to think about in terms of single incidents and the number of data that gets exposed, but also how then the financial consequences can quickly sum up for this kind of incidents, and also how difficult it is to figure out where the problem is when you have many agents working at the same time. We have created a new framework, which is the Agentic AI Enterprise Guardrails for Information Security. This is, in short, Aegis, our Aegis framework. It builds on the 6 pillars of information security, and this is very, very important, it builds on 3 fundamental principles. I will explain those principles in a second. You can see them on the slide, the explainable outcomes, the continuous risk management, and the list agency. Very important sorts of principles in the Aegis frameworks. But before we go to the principles, I want to show you the pillars of information security that we have adapted to the context of AI agents. Governance, risk and compliance, identity and access management, data security and privacy. I'm going to stop on this one just because, again, my research coverage is very closely related to this one. And again, there are some fundamental elements that we have to consider, starting from the discovery and classification of the assets that these agents now are going to consume. And it's important that in an organization, the understanding of what sensitive data is becomes shared understanding, shared knowledge. Because as every employee can connect agents to certain systems, and these agents have the opportunity to process data, it's important that these employees know exactly what is sensitive data, what is corporate data that should then be used. They shouldn't be consumed by that agent, or they should be protected in order to be part of these AI initiatives. So data discovery and classification extremely important. The use of privacy preserving technologies, again, very important, not just protecting data at rest, not just protecting data in transit, but making sure the data is protected when in use. Again, these AI agents will consume your data, will process your data, and will make changes on the base of that processing activities. And so you need to make sure that the right protection is in place when these agents operate. And then finally, again, you saw in the slides previously the concerns with compliance with data protection regulations. But it is very important that organizations not only think about compliance, but also those key principles: data minimization, purpose limitation, making sure that the legal bases are in place. These key principles of data protections still apply even if you are working with agents, or even more so if you're working with agents. And so making sure that the processes and the tools are in place for these principles to be complied with, it's still extremely important. The other pillars we also cover in Aegis are application security, threat management, and then zero trust architecture principles. Now, I've said that I was going to spend some time to think about the key principles of Aegis and why these are so important in the context of agentic architecture. And so here are the principle we mentioned: least agency, continued risk management, and then the adaptability of security controls to make sure that intent is also secured. What are the technology that companies must have in order to really navigate the challenge with securing agents from a security perspective, from a data security and privacy perspective? Again, as I mentioned, the data discovery classification is very important, but that privacy preserving technologies, the idea that we need to have controls on that data at rest, in transit, and while that data is being processed. So that is definitely a key. And then the runtime policy enforcement, the ability not only to do this risk management and risk assessments on a continuous basis, but also have controls that we can enforce in runtime environments. Now, I said there is the security aspects of agents, which is definitely very important, but there is also another aspect, which is the aspect related to sovereignty. Digital sovereignty has become definitely a very important topic for many of our clients, many organizations, and I use a definition from the EU Parliament that says that digital sovereignty is the ability to build capacity, resilience, and security by reducing strategic dependencies from foreign actors and single service providers. We love the definition. However, that capacity part, that capacity is not necessarily abundant today if you wanted to look at something specifically in a certain region. But the reality is that sovereignty comes in many forms, and it doesn't mean that everything has to be on-prem or that everything has to be in a specific place. Is a combination of the controls you are going to use, of the assurance that these controls are going to give to you, so that you can create sovereign solutions across a spectrum. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. Before I go there, I wanted just to mention some of the initiatives that we see happening around AI sovereignty. A lot of different governments in Europe, you see there the Sea Lions, this is Asia Pacific government, so outside of Europe too, Canada, many governments are creating these national AI LLMs. What the idea is that you want to have models that are designed, trained, and managed in your country. This solves issue of alignment, cultural alignment, especially because, of course, if a model is trained with German data, with the German language, the performance of the model will result improved in a number of different use cases. And there is also some cases where companies really want to have that absolute control around their models. At the same time, when we talk about AI sovereignty, is not just about the models. AI sovereignty has a number of other other dimensions that are attached to it. First of all is the underlying infrastructure. So where are you running those models and the clouds that you are using in the management and in the delivery of AI? The type of model you choose is a third-party proprietary model, is an open source model. That's another important decision for AI sovereignty. And then other elements, I would say some cultural elements around the training of the model, for example. And some organizations are also considering, as part of their AI sovereignty strategy, the energy consumption that is also involved. As I said, there is a number of different options thinking about AI sovereignty, and there is a degree of possibility, full sovereign solution when you have really disconnected services that they are running just locally. For you, there are partial sovereign solution when you have a hybrid set of the hybrid infrastructure involved in the running of that solution. Sometimes you want to have a legal entity of a country just involved in the management of that and delivery of that specific AI model, or you can have a public option. So again, a lot of opportunities there. Which is another way to say this: every infrastructure can become sovereign to a certain extent. Organizations do not need everything to be on-prem, do not need everything to be in a single country for them to be sovereign. But again, it's about the combination of the legal element and the control that you are going to apply to each type of infrastructure to really achieve the right level of sovereignty that you need for your workloads. Again, is more around your own risk as an organization, so what you are trying to achieve, rather than a commitment to make everything fully sovereign, which is not even, for many organizations, is not even viable to do. Before I give the floor back to Miguel, let me just tell you two more things. One are a set of actions that you can take today for the security of your agent, sort of priority. Again, the discovery and the classification of personal data across those generative AI pipeline, including agents, it is very important. Use controls, again, to make sure that your data is safe for generative AI, for the agents as well. Those insights from your data discovery and classification are going to be essential to use to implement the least agency principle that we just mentioned, and also to run those risk assessments, making sure that you have the right attributes for the risk assessments that you need to run. Privacy preserving technology for data in use, extremely important. And then making sure that you have software that allows you to see what happens in those runtime environments as those agents are running. And when it comes to AI sovereignty, again, few recommendations there. Embed sovereignty as a enterprise risk management really is a risk conversation, and is a compliance and a risk conversation. It should belong there. Identify those sensitive workloads. Again, if the temptation is to make everything sovereign, that is not what you want, is not going to work in the way you need. And so really identifying the sensitivity of those workloads is important. I would say starting from the data layer is definitely a good idea, because again, a lot of sensitivity sits fundamentally in the data that is involved in those AI projects. Select providers that have enforceable guarantees that you can use, and then look at the controls. The controls are going to be critical to make sure that whatever infrastructure type you choose, you can really increase or decrease the level of sovereignty that you want. And again, look for that mix of different type of infrastructure. With this, well, thank you for this time. If you have any questions, as Mirza said, we are going to have a chance to discuss some more later. But for now, I'm going to give the floor to Miguel.
Thank you, Enza. That was a clear picture of edges and why privacy and data security are important domains to consider. I am Miguel Faria from Comforte, and what I want to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to link Forrester's framework with some practical examples that you will be able to use actually in production. So let's start why this matters right now. I will give you a few data points. The first one, the Replit incident that happened last year, in the summer of last year. There was an agent system, Agentic AI, performing some operations on live environments, and long and behold, one of the agents deleted a production database. More than 1,200 sensitive data records were actually deleted. The situation was so severe that the CEO of the company needed to provide some public explanations about that. The second number I would like to share with you dates from a report from last year as well, and states that 77% of the LLM traffic somehow already bypasses data loss prevention solutions that the company, that the enterprise may already be using. This is because, as Enza mentioned already, users may be using data points that are not being monitored. They may be using, their own personal accounts within their professional lives. Also, in the same report, they found out that 50% of the data that is pasted into agents or chatbots already contains some kind of corporate data. Last but not least, 76% of companies consider data security the first and most important concern in what, related to AI projects. Also, more than 30% of companies that implemented actually AI pipelines reported some kind of incident. So here's the takeaway. When agent fails, when agentic AI fails, and make no mistake about it, it will fail, only data-centric protection could eventually limit the damage that will cause. I will continue to lay out some foundational concepts to present our approach to solve this problem. So, as Enza already also alluded, the first step would be always to discover sensitive data. Of course, everybody knows that in your mission-critical applications, you have sensitive data there. But what about other applications that you may not be mapping? What about free-form text fields in ticket logs? What about chat interactions with with AI applications? After the first step, it's very important for you to classify sensitive data, right? Because let's face it, a credit card is not the same as a name of a customer. And last but not least, then you should protect the data. You should replace the sensitive data elements that you just discovered and classified by stateless tokens that hopefully will preserve the original format or will provide a format that is very similar to the original pieces of data. The idea is that the data itself carries the security. You see, it would be nice that the security is now an inherent property of the data itself and no longer some external property provided by an external system of control. And why we believe this is the right approach for agentic AI? Well, because let's face it, agents are moving data across machines at machine speed, across different regions, using APIs that you may not even aware that they are using. So that's why it's very important to have this foundational approach. Now, I would like to introduce to you, or to delve a little deeper, to three main aspects of how, in practice, we would implement this type of security controls. You see, the mistake that most organizations make is that they see every piece of the AI pipeline as a single point in which they would like or they need to put controls in place. So, for example, they may want to put a control in front of a RAG pipeline, RAG being retrieval augmented generation pipeline. They would like to put controls on in front of a vector database. Well, although we do not oppose to that, that should be a good idea. The problem is that then every single portion of it will become a project in itself. And the consequence is that your AI adoption will be very, very much delayed, right? We at Comforte, we do it differently. We protect the data once, and we do it with the data at source. So when you look into the slide that I'm just projecting on this left part of the screen, you will see identified several different and diverse types of data sources. Once again, it could be the database from your CRM system, which definitely has sensitive data about your customers. But it could be tickets, support logs, and yes, interactions with Agentic AI, and specifically interactions with chatbots. The idea would be to protect the data, tokenize the data at the source in such a way that later on, when the data is actually consumed by the AI agents or any point of your AI pipelines, the data is already protected. And therefore, the agent could pick up the data, do whatever it wants, and you are already secure. That's the main idea. How we do this? Well, we use our latest Tamunio Protect data-centric security platform to tokenize the data. We implement a stateless tokenization mechanism, also format preserving. The format preserving is very important because, once again, it's important for you to understand that we would like to have similar format of the original data. So, in other words, the token should be consistent, let's say, with the original pieces of data. So just to wrap up a little bit, we advocate for one-point protection because you won't need many more. We recommend a format preserved type of protection. And of course, last but not least, this process must be reversible. Isn't that right? Because in the end of the day, you will need for business purposes to have access to the original data back again. But you should do this. That reversibility should be put in place through policy. So that means that only authorized users, only authorized agents and systems should be able to get back to the data in the clear. Now, the second aspect that I would like to share with you will enable me to give you a little more concrete example. So here we are going to talk about protection and deprotection inside chatbots interactions. Well, by extension, by implication, this also means that you could apply the same principle to Agentic AI. Now, I divided the process in three major steps, being the first one, detect. Obviously, here I grouped the discovery and classification in just one step, which I call detect. And here, how we are doing this? We are using AI itself. We are using AI-powered name entity recognition techniques to automatically discover those sensitive pieces of data. We classify them, as I told you, and then we will tokenize that data. But please understand that we will do this even before the data actually touches or being consumed by any AI backend. Okay, so let's look into this example. Imagine that you have a human support agent, let's say. This human is interacting with the chatbot because obviously he or she wants to have some kind of answers, replies that would help to improve the job. At the same time, the company is also invested in this because the company wants to increase the productivity of their employees. Isn't that right? However, never forget, the company is also liable in the case of something goes wrong. So the idea here, once again, is to protect the data, to intercept the data, detect the data automatically in almost real time, intercept the data, tokenize the data using Tamunio Protect platform in such a way that the data will be consumed by your AI agent already tokenized. The agent will be able to do its job. Why? Because we are actually able to implement not only keeping the data very similar or consistent with the original piece, original format of the data, but we can go further. We are able to keep the referential integrity of the data, and by extension, that also means that we are able somehow to keep the statistical properties of the original data. Why we would like to do that? Because, as you are probably aware, AI is no more than sophisticated pattern recognition systems that extract patterns from the data. Well, if my tokens keep the same properties of the original data, the patterns are the same. You see, in the end of the day, for the agent, it doesn't matter if it is referring to a customer by its real name or by an alias that actually is represented by the token. Now, the AI agent will do its job and will reply back to the human user or to another agent in case of the agentic AI. Isn't that right? So what happens then is that now it's the time to re-identify the data, right? So now it's the time for the human to see back the data in a clear, to have access again to the data, to the original data, right? Now, I want to pause here and just to highlight once again. Everything that I'm saying was done completely with the data tokenized. So there is completely zero risk of data leakage in this type of scenario. Also, everything that I'm mentioning is auditable, and we are writing logs all along the way so that you are always aware of everything is going on. And why this matters now? Well, you see, not only because of the Replit use case, actually, Enza also gave many cases of situations that went wrong, right? For example, in the case of Samsung, which happened a couple of years ago, a bunch of Samsung engineers were trying to debug some code, and with the help of AI, they pasted the code into ChatGPT, and the data was leaked. And make no mistake about it, when these data touch these big lab, AI agents, the data will be part somehow of the weights of the model, and it will be very, very difficult to remove afterwards. The third and last aspect, which also links back with some of the message from Enza, the concept of data sovereignty zone. What do I mean by this in this context? In the old days, most, if not all, of your workloads would run on-prem, right? And as long as you would trust your own IT infrastructure, everybody would be happy. In the last 2 decades, people wanted to start using different types of cloud environments and cloud flavors. Why is that? Because it's economical, interesting for the companies. Also from the operations point of view. So companies want to use a cloud to run, let's say, analytics pipeline. And yes, more recently to run agentic AI solutions. The problem is that those environments, especially public cloud, cannot be trusted. So that's why we, in our vision, the way you should do is that, once again, if you protect the data at source, let's say, starting from your legacy applications, assuming that then your analytics workloads do not need to see back the data in the clear, then you can export the data already protected, tokenized. Remember, the data will have the same type of properties, and your machine learning, your data analytics applications will work, will not break. Now, we also acknowledge that there is some situations, some periods, or some specific cases in which you will need to have access to the data in the clear. For example, if you are thinking about data cleansing operations, of course, data cleansing operations must be done by definition with the real data. So how do you solve this problem? On one hand, you want to use cloud. On the other hand, there is this contention that would advise you not to do so. And that's where we introduce the data sovereignty zones concept. Think about an embassy, right? The concept is very similar. With an embassy, you have a piece of a sovereign state that actually is hosted inside another country. However, the operations that run inside that embassy are accordingly to the legislation, to the regulation of the original country. That's exactly the same concept here. How do we implement this? Once again, using our latest Tamunio protection platform alongside with confidential compute hardware with a proper attestation. And therefore, you can have a completely isolated, a completely secure environment end to end. Your workloads can run safely because you are totally isolated. That trust problem no longer exists. And I would like to wrap up the same way that as I started. I will map back the edges framework from Forrester with our practical implementation. On the left side of your screen, you will see the must-haves that Forrester advises. On the right side of your screen, you have just the aspects and the implementation nuances that I just mentioned. So the bottom line is the following. You should discover and classify sensitive data automatically, inline, in real time. You should tokenize the data at source. Create tokens that represent your data, but they are completely random, and therefore they don't have any value for outsiders. And you should only reveal the data when absolutely necessary, and only by the people or agents that should have access to that data. This is how you take the edges framework presented by Enza into a real practical implementation in such a way that will no longer slow down your business processes and will no longer needs to say no to AI projects. Thank you very much for your time. I will be here to answer any questions that you may have. Back to you, Mirza. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you, Enza and Miguel. This was really, really interesting. I need to say we are slightly over time, but I would still like to use a couple of minutes to address some of the questions that we got from the audience. Maybe we will do one or two. So I think the first one is for you, Enza. Which digital sovereignty rules companies must comply with, and are regulators around the world enforcing those sovereignty requirements?
That's an interesting question. Thank you, Mirza. And I think there is a lot of discussions about the compliance with digital sovereignty. There aren't rules that are specific digital sovereignty rules to start with. As I have said, is really around, there is an important compliance aspect that we are going to touch on very quickly, but the other part is really the risk appetite that organizations have. So the compliance aspect is very much related to the data protection requirement that we have in regulation like the GDPR. There are very specific articles that says that you cannot move personal data of European citizens into other jurisdictions unless there are certain requirements met. And so these are the type of compliance requirements that we are looking at, really around data protection. Digital sovereignty, on the other hand, of course, it starts with that data component, which is, again, very important and regulated in many ways, but also involves then other elements of infrastructure, network, endpoints, and those are beyond those requirements. So data protection requirements, yes, on the data for your sovereignty strategy is your starting point. Other aspects of the strategy not relate necessarily to regulatory requirements. And then the second part of the question was around, so are regulators enforcing? Again, regulators are enforcing the rules, the data protection requirements that we have. Definitely yes, and I am glad that we have an opportunity to say that, because sometimes it feels like regulators are really not doing much when it comes to compliance with data protection rules, but they are. And actually, there was last year the very famous case of TikTok. That was one of the largest fines that we have seen last year here in Europe. And it was specifically an issue around data transfers. So data from European citizens transferred to other jurisdictions without the required protection and processes from a compliance standpoint. There was also there were a few other cases, including one even in Nigeria, that are to do specifically with the transfer of personal data from one region to the other. So regulators are indeed have been watching this space last year. They will continue to do so. So that compliance aspect matters, and it matters a lot.
Okay, thank you. One more we can cover, I think, and this one is for Miguel. One challenge, so from the audience, one challenge we have is that sensitive data often needs to be in plain text so it can be processed. How should organizations think about this for AI workloads in the cloud, and can they address it without moving everything back on-prem?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. I would start by actually reflecting about that assumption. First, do you think that you really need to have access to the data in a clear in at least most of the situations? Well, probably you won't, provided that you protect the data with this type of technology, right? Provided that you exchange the original data by these placeholders, by these tokens that have these properties that I mentioned during the presentation. But I give you that. I acknowledge that in some situations you will definitely would need to have access to the data in a clear due to business purposes, obviously. When you are working with a human resources application and you want to give a raise to an employee, of course, the mathematical calculation must be done against the original number. And there, my latest part of the question will be unfolding into two parts. The first one is the following. If you trust the environment, the runtime that you are running these workloads, you should use Tamunio Protect to detokenize the data only at that moment and only by the people or agents that really need to have access to the data. Therefore, by nature, you already reduce the surface of attack, you already reduce your problem to the bare minimum. If you do not trust your runtime environment for whatever reason, maybe you are running in the cloud, that's where our technology, our latest technology that helps to implement real data sovereignty zones come into play. Why is that? Because these environments are completely trustable by definition. They are completely isolated even from the owners of the infrastructure, the cloud providers. I hope that I answered your question.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. So we are over time, and we have a couple of more questions. So if you still have questions that are left unanswered, please just reach out to us via email or contact on our website. And so we are coming to the end of the webinar. Big thank you to Enza and Miguel again for sharing your insights with us, and to all of you who have joined today. We appreciate your time and hope again that the session gave you some practical ideas and useful takeaways, and we hope to see you again next time. So thank you very much.